Hey, what's up everyone? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Now we're continuing in our video series, Advanced Ableton Live Tips to help you instantly be more creative in your projects. And this video is going to be focusing in on the drum rack. There's so many amazing features about the drum rack that are oftentimes overlooked. So we're going to dive deep into it and see how it can instantly boost some creativity. Let's go ahead and get started. Now typically you would drag and drop a sample into the drum rack. We'll see a snare here. Drag and drop that into a cell. And then it would load a sampler in that cell. And so you can go ahead and trigger that cell and that sample gets triggered. But you can also drag and drop third-party plugins or instruments as well. So we'll go to our instruments, grab a wavetable, click and drag that there as well. And now when you trigger that cell, it's triggering the one note to this wavetable. So this could be really useful if you're trying to do like a cool sub drop or something like that and you wanted to have more control over the sound design of something. You would do that by just dragging and dropping an instrument here. Now unfortunately, you won't be able to play different keys in that instrument. You're just triggering this with one note. So keep that in mind. This is more so to just trigger this instrument. So if this instrument is maybe like an arcade or anything really that when you trigger it, plays a specific sound or an effect that you like, you can have that slated here in the drum rack. Now, if you wanted to change the key of what note triggers that instrument, you can use a MIDI effect plugin called Pitch, click, drag that onto that, and now you can go ahead and determine what pitch is actually going to be triggering this instrument. So if you were loading, let's say, a sampler, you can go ahead. Well, let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. So let's just go to, let's say, an arcade, which is a plugin made by Output, which allows you to trigger individual samples. And we'll go to a line here, and let's just say drum machine. I'll load this up here. And so if I trigger this now, it's triggering this random note here. So there's nothing there. So I'm going to use the pitch plugin. Drag that down and find a sample. So that might be the sample I want to trigger in the drum rack. Now, that's how you would go ahead and implement dragging and dropping instruments or plugins into the drum rack to be triggered. Why would you want to put it there when you can just have the arcade in a separate track? Hey, that makes sense. But just to give you an idea that it can be done and it might be useful for some particular reasons down the road. Next thing I really want to focus in on is note choking. It's something that I completely overlooked at the beginning stages of using Ableton Live. And so note choking allows one note to cancel the other, or one sound to cancel the other when it's playing. And this is really helpful, specifically when you're trying to create some realistic and vibe and patterns to your drums. So for instance, we have here loaded kick, snare, hi-hat, and an open hi-hat. What we're going to do is have this basically every time the open hi-hat is interrupted with the close hi-hat, we want the open hi-hat to stop. And that's what we're going to use the choking method. So when you have sounds loaded in the drum rack, simply click the upper right-hand corner here of the drum rack, and this is going to expand that open. And you'll see a somewhat of a mixing window of all the sounds located inside the drum rack. Okay, you can trigger them here so you can get a preview of what that sound is on there. And notice that you can always click and drag things around, and that won't necessarily switch anything here on the pads. So for me, sometimes I like having my kick and then another kick or a snare kind of lined up next to each other for mixing purposes, but I don't necessarily want to arrange them differently on my pads. So that's good to know. So let's go back to choking. Here's the hi-hat. Here's the closed hi-hat. And what we're going to do is we're going to click this box here, and you notice by default it'll have none. That says is there's no choking number assigned. So we're going to assign this to the number 1. So anything with the same number 1 in this little box means that they are going to cancel each other out. So let's put the number 1 over here to the open hi-hat as well. Therefore, when I hit the open hi-hat and I hit the close one, the open hi-hat will choke. It would basically stop. So let's take a look at how this works practically. Let's go ahead and create a blank clip or 1 bar clip here, and I'm going to choose the open hi-hat. Now normally As you can see, depending on the length of the note that we input here determines the length of the sound that's being heard. So if we play this, let's go ahead. We're only going to be hearing it for that short amount of time, and that's due to the specific mode that we're in with this hi-hat. And when you're in classic mode here, this basically means that you're determining the length of the sample by the amp envelope here. So if the release is all the way up, then we'll hear the sample play no matter how short the note is drawn in the grid. So we put the release down, that means that the sound will stop immediately after the length or you let go of that note. So really short sound. So what we want to do is go from classic to one-shot mode. And that's going to play regardless of the length of the note. But we can also fix that by choosing from trigger to gate. Then what that means is, depending on the length of the note, that's going to determine the actual length of the sound that's being heard. So if we wanted to end right here, that's where it'll end. So going back to the choke thing that we mentioned, we've got the open hi-hat and the close hi-hat on the same choke number. So if we extend this open hi-hat all the way over here, but place a hi-hat that has the same choke number on there, that means that the open hi-hat will stop the second the hi-hat here is being played. And there you go. So that's pretty cool, because then that makes it much more realistic to have the open hi-hat and then close once the close hi-hat happens. I mean, sometimes when you draw in an open hi-hat and then you put a close hi-hat note there, but the open hi-hat still plays, it's not really realistic because that doesn't happen in real life. So it could be really useful for that. So for instance, let's go ahead and create a pattern. I'm going to hit the B mode, draw that in, and we'll take this out here and we'll close it when we open it again. And then put this right here and then open it up again with another hi-hat, an open hi-hat note here, and then close it again with the close hi-hat. And that's how using choke in the drum rack could be really useful to creating a more realistic groove. Now let's talk about layering multiple sounds in one cell. Now, this is nothing too crazy advanced, but yet again, this is something that can be overlooked because instead of loading multiple different types of kicks and snares in many different cells, you can kind of combine multiple kicks so that they are layered with one another. So let's head over to this Beat Academy sample pack, and let's say I want to layer this snare. It's a nice little rim knock with the snare that we have here. So what I'll do is just click and drag on top of that, but then that will erase this snare and just replace it with that one. So what I need to do is click this snare, right click on it, and then choose group. And then that creates an instrument rack inside this one snare. So now we can go ahead and drag this into this instrument rack and we have multiple sounds in there. So now the snare is triggering both of these files together. And then you could balance within the two if you want more of that first snare sound or the second one. And you could technically load this with a whole bunch of different types of snares. We'll click all that, and there you go. So we basically have all of these snares being triggered at once, coming up with some crazy type of sound. And as you notice that once we've done that, once you've layered a sound, you now have another drop-down menu here. And so these are now all the individual snare sounds in this one snare group. And just give this another color so that we can see that. And so it can be really helpful in sound designing and crafting the sound you're looking for when you can layer multiple sounds, but yet still be able to trigger the pattern by just clicking the one snare note here. So you're not seeing a stack or a layer of 7 or 5 different type of snares. I'm really just drawing in one snare, but it's triggering all of these other snares here. Now, since we're on the topic of layering and adding more samples, it could very well be overwhelming and wanting to change one parameter and then having to go through all the other samples to change them as well. So for instance, let's say that we have, right now we only have the kick, snare, hi-hat, and open hi-hat. But let's say you start to drag and drop all these different samples here. We just click, add them into this, and you can see it's gonna fill up all these cells. So as soon as I let them in there, we've got all of these samples now loaded into this drum rack. And you might find yourself in this situation where you tweak one sound, but then you want to go ahead and do that same tweak to all of them, but you don't want to manually go in there and have to tweak that. And for instance, let's say we turn the filter on and we want to filter all of these here to, let's just bring the filter down. Now, I would have to go to each individual sample and do that same thing because they're all in a different place, right? So we'll just move it here. Same thing for these. I would go in here, turn them on. Now, that could be overwhelming if you have a bunch of samples that you want to tweak. So just go to the first sample that you've done the tweaking to. Let's just put this 257, right, with low pass. Right-clicking on that parameter, and then you're going to do copy value to siblings. And you can see the number 30 there. That's indicating that you're going to copy the same value onto 30 other samples. So we click this, and now what that's done is it's copied that same thing. You can see I can click over here. We're at 257 here on this kick, 257 on the snare, 257 on the hi-hat, so on. I can go randomly up here, and you'll see the frequency at 257. So it literally copied that parameter onto all of the other samples. So it just makes it easier to tweak something and then not have to worry about having to go to each individual sound and tweaking that as well if you like that. So staying on the subject of layering, now we're going to focus on triggering the sounds individually and not all together. So here I have a couple samples from this kick folder in the sample pack that you can download for free. Just click the link below in the description box. Let's go ahead, click and drag that into the drum rack. Now, as you can see, it's going to load multiple sounds in their own individual cells, but if you hold the command key, that will go ahead and just load them all into one key there. But if we hit play, that is going to trigger all of them sounding like a robot farting on itself. So there you go. But what we want to do is now be able to selectively choose the kick that we want to be heard. So let's go over here to the chain and selecting all of them, just hold shift, select all the samples that are there. And well, there you go, or command A, and just spreading the chain all the way to the right so that they're all equally going from 0 to 127 value. Then right click on any one of the blue stripes and hit distribute ranges equally. And that's going to distribute the range in which this sample can be selected. Now, this little button here, the little blue fader, wherever that lines up, that's the sample that we're going to be listening to. So it's pretty cool. Now we just need to go ahead and map this to macro 1, and that's going to go ahead and allow us to use this as a way to change the sounds by turning up this knob. But we've created a macro within the drum rack here. So now I'm going to go repeat this process and choose to map this to macro 1 so that this will be assigned to the very first macro here for this sound. So when we scroll this up and down, we can now choose our individual kicks. So once again, this is really helpful. So if you're just mapping out some sounds, let's say here, and we're doing some 4 on the floor type stuff. Let's say I want to go ahead and change the sound of that kick. So it's really helpful in that sense that you can already just start mapping out the sequences and going back to switching the kick or the snares, or you can do this with any type of sounds whatsoever, and just gives you that ability to go and interchange the sounds, and find the one that you like that fits well. Then you can just save these drum racks as a kit, and technically you can load, I can have about 127 different kick drums here, 120 different snare drums here, and so on and so on. You could do that over multiple amounts of times and save this as a ultimate drum rack that you can always use and will fit with any genre of music that you're trying to produce, because you can simply just scroll through the macro and select the sound that you're looking for. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about adding a return effect inside the actual drum rack itself. So let's go ahead and view the chains by clicking this little chain window icon, and then you're going to head over to the bottom and click the R. That's going to focus on the return effects that we're going to be adding. And you'll notice right here it says drop audio effects here. So for this case, I want to add some reverb to that snare drum. So instead of adding it directly, I also want to share that reverb with other instruments or other sounds inside the drum rack. So let's click this reverb here in the audio effects folder, and you could use any plugin for that matter, but click and drag into the spot where it says drag audio effects here. And now we have a return track inside the drum rack. So if you collapse the drum rack, you don't see it, but when you expand it, you see it here. And now we just have to, and you see a send right here, A to the reverb, A. So now we can send a little bit of that reverb, or a lot of that reverb, over to the reverb and this here. So if I wanted to send some reverb from the snare there, maybe just a little bit of the reverb to the kick. So there you have it. But now we want to be able to send the reverb out to a return track that we have present here. So return track D has nothing on there. So I'll choose return track D. And now the output of my reverb is actually going to be heard out through here. So that's helpful so that if you collapse the drum rack, you can actually still tweak and finesse the actual texture and sound of the reverb output through here. And I use that a lot because then sometimes I want to be able to just control the reverb or balance the reverb tone a little bit without having to always collapse and expand the drum rack view. So you can do that here. Well, I hope this video was helpful. I know there's so many other secrets, but I think this is a good place to start in incorporating things that you can pick up with the drum rack to help boost creativity. And stay tuned, subscribe so that you can stay up to date with the following coming videos in this video series.